The story begins on Christmas Eve when a New York City police detective, John McClane, comes to Los Angeles to reunite with his wife. A cab driver, Argyle, comes to pick him up from the airport. On their way, Argyle discovers John's troubled relationship with his wife. He then drops John at Nakatomi Tower, where Holly, John's wife, works. Argyle tells him he'll wait for John in the garage if things do not work out with Holly and John has to leave. John then enters the tower and attends a party on the 30th floor arranged by Holly's Japanese employer, Joe Takagi. He meets up with Holly, Joe, and a man named Ellis, who he thinks has an eye for Holly. Afterward, Holly takes him to freshen up, and they discuss their marriage. However, a woman soon interrupts their conversation and calls Holly for a speech at the party. In the meantime, a loader enters the tower's basement, while a car stops in the front. Two terrorists named Carl and Theo get out of the car and join inside. Carl shoots the security guards while Theo calls his associates present in the loader and tells them to enter. As they exit the loader, Theo enters the security room. He hijacks the elevators to the 29th floor, keeping the service elevator and the elevators from floors 34 to 29 functioning entirely. His team members, alongside leader Hans Gruber, enter the tower. On the other side, John calls Argyle, but the call ends as a terrorist cuts all the telephone cables in the building, leaving John suspicious. Simultaneously, Gruber and his team enter the party area and take everyone hostage. The sound of gunshots alerts John, and he peeks outside to analyze the situation. Gruber then asks everyone about Joe Takagi, and as Takagi comes forward, they take him to another room. Meanwhile, John escapes from the bathroom and arrives in the same room. He hides himself and listens to Gruber asking Takagi for a code to the vaults, where bearer bonds worth $640 million are kept. Takagi refuses to reveal the code, and Gruber kills him. Afterward, Gruber, alongside tech expert Theo, goes to the vaults. In the meantime, John sneaks onto the rooftop and sees a fire alarm. He rings it, but unfortunately, Gruber's man shuts it off. They realize the alarm was from the rooftop, and Carl's brother goes to check. Upon reaching there, John and Carl's brother end up in a fight, and John kills him. John then sends the dead body to the party area through the elevator, where Gruber, alongside his men, talks to the hostages. They see the elevator opening and are shocked by the situation. They start a discussion, and John, on top of the elevator, listens to them and notes their names on his arm. He then goes to the rooftop and uses Carl's brother's walkie-talkie to tune into the police's radio channel. He reports the situation to a police officer, who sends Sergeant Powell to check the report's authenticity. However, Gruber's men also hear the announcement and run to the rooftop. Once there, they shoot at John, who skillfully escapes and reaches the room where Takagi was murdered. From a window, he notices a police car stopping outside the building. Powell enters the Nakatomi Towers while John tries to break the window to gain his attention. A few of Gruber's men hear the window breaking and enter the room. A fight ensues between John and the men, and John kills them. On the other side, after finding nothing suspicious, the police officer exits the building. However, John strategically throws a dead body on Powell's car, which terrifies him. Powell hurriedly orders a backup, and soon, police cars gather outside the building. In the meantime, John takes Hans on the radio and informs him about the death of his men. Hans realizes those men had the detonators and asks Carl to search for them. Carl comes back a little while later and informs Hans that the bag carrying detonators is missing. Over the radio, Powell connects John, and John informs him about the hostages and Hans Gruber, as well as his men. In the meantime, the chief officer, as well as the news channels, arrive at the Nakatomi Tower. The chief sends a group of guards forward to check, as he doesn't believe in John, despite Powell's continuous reassurances. Inside, Hans makes his people ready for an attack, and as the guards enter inside, they are shot dead. The chief, blind to the situation, sends a police wagon ahead. However, Hans' men blow it up with the help of a missile. John, upon noticing the case, decides to take things in his hands and picks up a bomb from one of the terrorists' bags. He throws the bomb down the elevator passageway and the building shakes. On the other side, Ellis goes to Hans and reveals John's identity. Afterward, Hans, over the radio, asks John to return the detonators, or they'll start to kill the hostages one by one. He shoots Ellis and makes John hear the screams of the hostages. After ending the call with John, Hans negotiates with the police and gives the police 2 hours to free the men belonging to his organization who are under police custody worldwide. Moreover, he says that once the men are free, the hostages will then accompany Hans Gruber and his team to Los Angeles International Airport, from where they'll be further guided. After the call ends, it is revealed that he only needed time for Theo to work on the vaults since he has unlocked 6 and is working on the final one, which is the toughest. Outside, the FBI arrives and takes the charge away from the chief. Back in the building, Hans Gruber walks around and is met with John McClane. He pretends to be a hostage, and John gives him a gun, asking Hans to follow him to stay safe. When John turns around, Hans points the gun at John's back and calls his men. John looks at Hans, and Hans demands the detonators. John moves towards Hans, and Hans shoots the gun only to find it empty. However, Hans' men arrive at the scene and start to shoot at John. John escapes through the exit with bleeding feet and leaves the detonators behind accidentally. Hans gets them, and Theo calls him to tell him he's done with 6 vaults. However, the only way to open the last one is to cut the power. Simultaneously, John starts to bandage his bleeding feet so that he can walk again. Hans goes to Theo and analyzes the situation. He tells him that in these situations, the first thing the FBI does is cut the power of the building. And soon the FBI cuts the electricity, giving the terrorists a chance. Theo then opens the last vault, and Hans, alongside his team, rejoices over the bearer bonds present there. Hans talks to the FBI on the radio, and FBI Special Agent Johnson tells him the helicopters have been arranged and cuts the call. The reporters reach John's children and start interviewing them. Back at the building, John drags himself to the top and realizes that the terrorists have wired bombs on top to blow the rooftop off. But before he can inform the police, Carl points his gun at John. Both of them get into a fight, and in the meantime, the helicopters arrive. Hans' men tell him about the helicopters, and he's about to leave when suddenly John's kids come on the TV. Hans listens to them and realizes Holly is John's wife. He takes Holly to the vaults, while another terrorist takes the remaining hostages to the rooftop. Simultaneously, John kills Carl and runs to the rooftop. He kills the terrorist there and asks the hostages about Holly, who informs him that Holly is in the vaults. He then shouts at everyone to leave the rooftop and go downstairs since it is all wired. As everyone escapes, John ties himself to a water pipe and jumps off the building, landing inside one of the rooms. Hans, on the other hand, notices the hostages coming back from the rooftop and blows it off. John then checks his machine gun and realizes only 2 bullets are inside. On the other side, in the building's garage, Argyle witnesses Theo preparing to escape and crashes his car into Theo's, making Theo unconscious. Back in the building, John reaches the vaults and shouts at Hans to come forward. However, Hans points his gun at Holly and orders John to release his weapon. John puts down his gun, and Hans starts laughing at his victory, unaware that John has a gun taped to his back. John suddenly takes out the gun and shoots at Hans and his accomplice. However, Hans falls out of the building, holding Holly's hand. John runs towards Holly and detaches Hans' hand from hers, making Hans fall from the tower. John and Holly kiss in happiness and then come out of the building. They meet with Sergeant Powell, and the movie ends with Argyle coming to pick John and Holly in his car and dropping them off at their home. Die Hard, released in 1988, directed by John McTiernan, produced on a budget of approximately $28 million. The movie is based on the novel Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe. This was Alan Rickman's first feature film role, and he delivered a memorable performance as the sophisticated yet ruthless Hans Gruber. The success of Die Hard led to several sequels, cementing its status as a franchise and establishing John McClane as one of action cinema's most enduring heroes. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. Turn on the notifications and leave a like to help the channel out.